getting things done, for being a good administrator, but also for cultivating good relations with the population, for having the common touch. It's exactly what Gorbachev wanted in terms of boosting his own support. But when Yeltsin came to Moscow, he very rapidly started using populist appeals against the bureaucracy, even against the Communist Party, to build up his personal image. This was regarded as desperately worrying by the Communist Party in general, but ultimately by Gorbachev himself, and they kicked him out.
Gorbachev demoted Yeltsin to Deputy Construction Minister. Yeltsin's political ambitions were dashed. It was a humiliating blow that he would never forget or forgive. Perestroika was put to the test in the summer of 1988. Gorbachev called an unscheduled party conference.
The normal policy-making body of the Soviet Communist Party was a Congress, which took place every 5 years, and then in between you had the Central Committee meeting maybe twice a year. He decided that the Congress, which he'd held in '86, hadn't done the job, and he wanted something new. So delegates were stunned when he came up with the idea of forming a new kind of Soviet parliament. It would be called the Congress of People's Deputies, and the major change was that 2/3 of the seats would be freely elected. There'd be contested elections. Previous elections, of course, in the Soviet system were really artificial. And that was really the moment at which the revolution from above turned into the revolution from below. Suddenly, a license had been given for the Soviet public to really become politically engaged for the first time for 60 years.
The streets were filled with the unfamiliar buzz of political campaigning. In March 1989, the people chose representatives for the Congress of People's Deputies. It was their first taste of democracy. Russia and the other republics sent their most outspoken critics of the Soviet system into the national government.
They were truly free elections. Despite all of the shortcomings, it was a wave that swept away layers of waste that had been collecting for decades.
It did indeed produce a very strong vote for reform and change, but it also led to a tremendous mobilization of popular discontent. In various of the republics, this led to a wave of nationalism pointing towards independence from the Soviet Union. In Russia, it led to a great wave of support for the so-called Democrats, and particularly for a former communist boss turned populist politician, Boris Yeltsin.
In a sweep of the Moscow vote, Yeltsin secured a seat in the Congress of People's Deputies. Gorbachev's own reforms put Yeltsin back in power. The public was energized, but the economy continued to decline. Resistance to Gorbachev increased on both sides.
The people around me that took the position of resisting reforms, they hampered the process of perestroika, of decision-making, and dragged it all out. And the Democrats, especially after they got positions in the Congress of People's Deputies and the Supreme Soviet in the 1989 elections, they wanted to do everything fast. Democrats always thought that I was making a deal with the right. I think that, generally speaking, these two extremes were very dangerous, and they whipped each other into a frenzy.
The instruments we needed were in place. Parliament existed now. So we thought we could just keep going. But when it came to the economy, there wasn't enough determination. They were talking about it then. It isn't that Gorbachev didn't talk about those things. He spoke of social improvements as an immediate goal. He spoke of a market economy. Decisions were made, but no practical steps were taken in any of these directions.
Reforms cut the economy loose from centralized power, but without any new structure, industry and agriculture floundered. The Soviet people bore the brunt of the economic slide.
Let them film. What kind of glasses is there in this country?
I am a pensioner, he is a pensioner, and the children need meat.
Just tell us, will there be meat today?
There will be, but you have to wait.
I have 3 loaves of bread for my neighbor and me, and 5 small rolls.
How do you feel about the rise in prices?
It's useless. You should listen to their speeches. It's shameful. I listened until 4:15 yesterday. They all shout, one on top of another, but no one gets to the point.
At home, Gorbachev's popularity plummeted, but internationally he became something of a celebrity. The new foreign policy had made him the darling of the West. Polls in Europe revealed him to be more popular than any Western leader. The following year, he won the Nobel Peace Prize. Inspired by this success, Gorbachev announced an end to Soviet intervention in Eastern Europe. The Warsaw Pact governments were now on their own. The declaration triggered a chain reaction. Democratic movements that had been smouldering in Eastern Europe sparked into life. Poland was the first. In June 1989, under public pressure, Poland's Communist Parliament opened itself to free elections. The people voted Lech Wałęsa's Solidarity Party into power. It was Eastern Europe's first non-communist government in 40 years. After Poland, the Iron Curtain collapsed.
I jumped over the wall.
You jumped over the wall?
I don't have even the English words to explain how I feel.
I have been dreaming of this for years.
I climbed over the wall and walked through the Brandenburg Gate.
Berlin, November the 9th, 1989, marked the point of no return. The East German government indicated that travel restrictions to the West would be relaxed. Word spread as night fell over the divided city. Within minutes, thousands of East Berliners gathered at the wall. Border guards were bewildered. A few weeks earlier, they would have opened fire, but now they stood back as people barged through checkpoints and were helped over the wall by jubilant Westerners. In a matter of days, Germany was reunified in the streets of Berlin. The Soviet Union surrendered its chief ally without a fight.
What kind of democrats would we be? What kind of innovators? If we held free and fair elections in our country, in this most complicated country, undertook reforms and led the country out of its totalitarian past into democracy, and yet at the same time denied the people of Central and Eastern Europe the right to decide their own fate, it would be totally unacceptable. This is why we did not meddle anywhere.
Democratic activists broke the communist monopolies in Hungary and Bulgaria. In Czechoslovakia, the Velvet Revolution bloodlessly toppled the communist regime. But Romania was a different story. President Ceausescu attempted to crush the democratic movement, but his army rebelled. The single bloody revolution of 1989 ended on Christmas Day with the execution of Ceausescu and his wife.
I think Gorbachev felt that if there was reform in Eastern Europe, it would be the communist parties that would lead the reform, that they would reform themselves and turn themselves into some kind of social democratic parties. And then when the thing began to change, I think Gorbachev hoped that because it was the communist parties that had allowed reform, that people would vote for them out of gratitude because they were the reformers. And that, of course, was complete nonsense. But I think that was the expectation.
By the end of the year, the communist Eastern Bloc was gone. Gorbachev tried to maintain an alliance, but it was clear that the Warsaw Pact was an obsolete relic of the Cold War. In the West, Gorbachev was a hero of democracy. But among conservative communists at home, he was the radical who lost Eastern Europe. They had cause to worry. The same nationalist forces that brought down the Iron Curtain were stirring in the very heart of the Soviet Union.
Comrade Mikhail Sergeyevich is elected president of the Supreme Soviet.
On March the 15th, 1990, Gorbachev was elected to the new office of the presidency. He entrusted this decision to the Congress of People's Deputies, but not to the Soviet public as a whole. Democrats began to push for a multi-party system. They pressurized Gorbachev to repeal Article 6, the law which guaranteed Communist Party rule. The new president yielded. For the first time, non-party members were free to hold government offices. Yeltsin wasted no time in resigning from the Communist Party. Suddenly, the most powerful man in Russia was a non-communist. Energized by the events in Eastern Europe, the other republics began to test the limits of perestroika. The Baltics had a history of bitter resentment towards Soviet rule. These tiny republics struck the first real blow to the Union.
Like other Soviet republics, the Baltic states had been part of the Russian Empire before the revolution. Unlike them, they gained their independence and were members of the League of Nations between 1920 and 1940. In 1940, they were annexed by Stalin as a result of a pact with Hitler the previous year, but they never forgot their legacy of independence.
On the 11th of March 1990, the new leaders of Lithuania proclaimed their independence from the USSR. Estonia and Latvia quickly followed suit. Gorbachev branded their actions illegal.
You will not secede from the Soviet Union. You are a civilized people, no matter what a few radicals might do, and you won't leave. You won't go against your conscience after all.
The 28th Congress of the Communist Party met in July of 1990. The atmosphere was fervently patriotic, but this was to be their last Congress. With the economy in freefall and the Baltics seceding, Gorbachev retreated to a more conservative stance. But the crisis only worsened. Soviet special forces seized the Free Lithuanian television station in Vilnius. Pro-independence demonstrators attempted a blockade. At least 13 people were killed. A week later in Riga, troops seized the Latvian Ministry of Internal Affairs, killing 4. To the south, crackdowns in Azerbaijan and Georgia had left many more dead. Vilnius and Riga, Baku and Tbilisi were now bloody spots on a reform process that was meant to be peaceful.
I always wanted to avoid bloodshed in this country. This terribly complicated transformation in this terribly complicated country. And I think we managed to do so, although there was Tbilisi and Baku and Vilnius. But we prevented a civil war. I don't know what would have happened to our country and to Europe if that had occurred.
I don't think Gorbachev approved in advance that action, and he was very concerned about what it meant. In fact, he went into virtual seclusion for over a week, and he was almost in a kind of depression, I think. Simultaneously, Yeltsin had one of his finest moments, because Yeltsin issued a statement saying that no Russian troops should take orders to do anything which would be illegal or criminal. Now, this was an incredibly important statement by Yeltsin. He was basically saying to Soviet officers, I am your commander-in-chief, not as Gorbachev.
In Russian cities, people voiced their outrage at the crackdowns. In a televised speech, Yeltsin called for Gorbachev's resignation and for the dissolution of the Soviet Congress of People's Deputies. Gorbachev decided to take the question to the Soviet people. In March 1991, the public voted on the fate of the USSR. Should the Union continue or be dissolved?